I thought it'd be helpful to give a little insight into what has just happened with Allison Pearson from the Daily Telegraph, who got a knock at her door from the police, I believe Essex police, on Remembrance Sunday, warning her about a tweet that had been reported, an old tweet, they wouldn't tell her which one, a tweet that had been deleted, and of course they wouldn't give her evidence of or a name for who it was that had reported her, because that person was now known as the victim. And that's in itself an interesting thing, that the minute someone makes a report, they are identified as the victim, regardless of whether they have anything worthwhile to say or not. The second thing that I think is really important is that all of this starts, like the little acorn of this is it possible to charge Allison Pearson? Is it possible to charge someone for a tweet written in the past, now deleted, that someone feels might have been hateful? And the answer is yes. The law exists that if you perceive that you were seriously harmed by a tweet, you don't have to prove what the harm was, and your court case can be found successful. And I know this because it's the law that was created for me. So in order to find me in the wrong with my court case about tweets that went to the High Court because I pushed it that far, new law had to be created for social media. And the new law states, and it is my law, that someone only has to perceive that they were seriously harmed, and that's enough. They don't have to show evidence of the harm. And the damage is done at the time of publication. And that's the key bit of the judgment against me. Damage is done at the moment of publication. So it doesn't matter if you delete it, as I did. Doesn't matter if you apologise for it, as I did. Doesn't matter if you offer to go meet with the person to try and sort it out in a sort of man-to-man manner. Doesn't matter. The court will still find that you're at fault and award payments against you, costs against you, all sorts of things against you. And that's what cost me my family home. Because I had to take this case all the way to the High Court because I knew it was ridiculous. And I knew that if I didn't do that, I would just have every other person that I'd ever insulted over the years coming out and saying that they perceived I had harmed them, which is exactly what happened. When my case was rumbling along, there was a sort of a bus stop queue of buses of people waiting to bring their case against me for their perceived serious harm. And this was all done just to, take me down. It cost me my family home because at the time I believed in the law. And I believed that, of course, a High Court would say, you can't perceive you're seriously harmed. You have to prove it. And that a judge would say, well, look, she deleted it. She apologised for it. But it doesn't work like that. This isn't a self-pity video either. It's an explainer. And what's so fascinating about it is that this is why I believe the media create monsters. And that's funded by highly funded political organisations and religious organisations. If you create a monster like me back in the day, then when it comes to something like a court case, again, highly funded, lots of different organisations behind my case, lots of different religious organisations behind getting me to court and getting my family home off me and all the rest of it and my humiliation. If you create a monster and you take them to court, everybody will applaud. It's like being, it's the Puritans and being in the stocks. Put Katie Hopkins in the stocks 10 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever it was. And everyone will applaud because, look at the monster being taken down a peg or two. That'll teach her for being on Twitter saying what she thinks. But eventually, of course, that law catches up with a good egg that isn't a monster, or not perceived as a monster. So Allison from the Telegraph is, in fact, being kind of recycled through a law that was made for me when I was a monster, but now it's touching approved people, or certainly a Telegraph columnist. I think she's brilliant. She'll have her fair share of enemies, but the point is, it's starting to touch upon people who really, when it happens to them, they cannot believe that just happened. They cannot believe it. Whereas, of course, it was part of my life for 10 years and is sort of still part of my everyday, really, knowing that it could be any day. And I think there's a few things you observe when it happens to you. You observe that you cannot rationalise the irrational. It is mad that 2 police officers come to your door over an old tweet that's now been deleted on a Sunday. I mean, it's mad. You can't rationalise it. You realise that the law is not the law. It's just a tool of control, and it can absolutely be bought. And if you are a public person, the people taking you to court might not be the people who are funding the action to take you to court, as I found out at my kind of bankruptcy hearings, because it cost me everything to try and get common sense to prevail. And I suppose ultimately, weirdly, I feel uplifted and positive about it, because I've lived long enough to see how the madness is starting to show itself. Because when it happens to a monster, everybody cheers. But when it starts to happen to public figures who have more support or official sort of credibility, people can start to challenge this more openly. People will say that law is ridiculous. And of course it is. I've always argued that the law that was made for me should be overturned because libel law is now lower than my labia. And one day, if it goes along like this, maybe it will. Maybe police forces will stop harassing people. And maybe, in the long run, my fight was not all for nothing. But that's really how this works. Pick a monster, create new laws, and then the job of the police, what they're hoping for, is to get the Crown Prosecution Service to argue that there is a case to answer for, that they will bring a charge and agree to pressing charges, and then that way you get to have some sort of, punitive measures taken against a political adversary. But I thought it would just be helpful to give a glimpse behind the curtain, given Allison is actually a direct kind of victim, if you will, of a law that was created especially to punish me.